Chapter 1, Section 7, Key Constitutional Principles. One of the challenges that the framers of the Constitution faced was making sure that increasing the authority of the federal government did not lead to a government with too much power. The memory of British control was still fresh in the minds of most Americans. The framers partially solved this problem through the separation of powers, dividing the power of the federal government across the three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. To make sure that citizens' rights are protected and that the government operates effectively, each branch has its own powers and responsibilities, including working with the other branches. In addition to the separation of powers, each branch has the ability to limit the power of the others in a system of checks and balances. The system of checks and balances means that each branch of government has certain exclusive powers, some shared powers, and the ability to restrain the powers of the other two branches. The principle of separation of powers and checks and balances were set forth and argued for in the Federalist Papers, discussed briefly in the previous section. In Federalist 51, James Madison assured his readers that they need not fear that the national government would grow too powerful. He believed that the federal system and the separation of powers would prevent any one part of the government from becoming too powerful. In addition, he said that tyranny would not arise in a government in which the legislature necessarily predominates. The Legislative Branch. Article 1 of the Constitution gives all legislative powers to a bicameral Congress, a House of Representatives, and a Senate, the result of the Great Compromise discussed previously. The system currently provides for a 2-year term of office for members of the House of Representatives, elected from the 435 population-based districts. Additionally, voters of each state elect 2 senators who serve 6-year terms. The legislative branch makes laws, regulates interstate and foreign commerce, controls and implements taxation, creates spending policies, and oversees other parts of the government. The 2 houses of Congress are fundamentally equal in their legislative functions and roles. However, there are a couple of key differences. Only the Senate confirms presidential nominations and approves treaties, and only the House can initiate and draft revenue legislation. To enact most other laws, both houses must separately agree to the same bill, in exactly the same form, before presenting it to the president for approval. Legislative action is planned and coordinated by political party leaders in each house. The leaders of each house are chosen by members of their party within their respective houses. Also, in both houses, much of the legislative process is performed within standing committees, groups of members from both parties that typically take the lead in developing legislation. Legislators normally serve on a small number of committees, often for many years, allowing them to become highly knowledgeable in certain policy areas. Committees are chaired by a member of the majority party, and each chair may work closely with the other party's top committee member, called the ranking member. In most committees, the ratio of majority party to minority party members on a committee reflects the overall ratio in each House chamber. Once a law is enacted, for example, passed by Congress and signed by the President, Congress is responsible for providing oversight of public policy implementation and its effects. The Executive Branch. The executive branch carries out and enforces laws. It consists of the President, the Vice President, the Cabinet, executive departments, independent agencies, and other boards, commissions, and committees. Key roles of the executive branch include: President serves as the leader of the federal government, as head of state, and as commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. The President serves a 4-year term and can be elected for a maximum of 2 terms. Vice President serves to support the President. If the President is unable to serve, the Vice President becomes President. The Vice President also serves as the President of the Senate. The Cabinet consists of the heads of executive departments. Cabinet members are nominated by the President and must be approved by a simple majority of the Senate, 51 out of 100 votes. The Judicial Branch. The judicial branch consists of the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal judicial system. According to the Constitution, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The number of Supreme Court justices is set by Congress rather than by the Constitution. There have been as few as 6 justices, but since 1869 there have been 9, including a Chief Justice. All justices are nominated by the President, require confirmation by the Senate, and hold their offices for life. Since justices do not have to run for office, they are assumed to be insulated from political pressure when deciding cases. The Supreme Court's cases are mostly appellate, for example, relating to appeals, in nature, and the court's decisions cannot be appealed to any higher legal or governmental authority, as it is the final judicial authority in the United States. Although the Supreme Court can hear an appeal on any legal issue under its jurisdiction, it typically does not hold trials. Instead, the court's task is to interpret the law and to rule on how a law should be applied. A case settled by the Supreme Court can have a sweeping impact on the law because its decisions establish precedent that all other courts must follow. Lower courts are required to follow the precedent set by the Supreme Court when issuing rulings on legal issues. Judicial review was defined by the Supreme Court itself in the case of Marbury v. Madison, 1803, which is discussed further in Chapter 3. Through the process of judicial review, the federal courts can declare legislative and executive acts unconstitutional. This illustrates how the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances work together to guard the citizens against potential government abuse of power.